September 11th, 2001. The day passenger jets turned into weapons. We could not bear to watch, and in our shock, we could not turn away as the World Trade Center fell.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward.
The Pentagon crumbled, and heroic passengers aboard United Flight 93 forced their plane down in the fields of Pennsylvania. We vowed never to forget. 10 years later, we pause yet again to remember. Now, a Newschannel 5 special program. Good evening, I'm Kelley Dunn.
And I'm McWilliams.
Events at Ground Zero Sunday in New York, in Washington, Pennsylvania, and communities like ours will recall the day when so many lives were lost and the life of our country was forever changed.
For the next half hour, you'll hear from South Floridians who were in the World Trade Center on 9/11, from victims' loved ones, and from local heroes. First, though, a look back. I, like so many of you, watched as the 9/11 attacks played out on live television, and then I was assigned to drive from Miami to New York to report on the unfolding tragedy. A memorial will be dedicated at Ground Zero Sunday, and a new skyscraper, One World Trade Center, is rising next to the place where the Twin Towers once stood. We endure and move on. 10 years ago, as I drove over the George Washington Bridge into the stricken city, my first image was of the smoke rising from lower Manhattan. It never stopped in my nearly 2 weeks there, and for a long time after that. At the demolished World Trade Center, National Guard troops moved in to offer a helping hand. I could not, none of us could fully grasp the enormity, the horror of what we witnessed. The aftershocks continue. The nearby Liberty Plaza building, shaken to its core, is now leaning and could fall. Some 20 blocks or so from where I stood each night, rescuers labored under the lights at Ground Zero, and all of us, recounted the mind-numbing tragedy. The official toll of those missing stands at some 4,700 people. Early on, there was some small cause for hope, for survival. 2 firefighters emerging from the devastation relatively unharmed. Mostly, though, there was only the courageous, tireless, but overwhelmingly sad and futile search for life. There was also the resolute vow to honor the memory of the innocent dead. A surreal scene here, the president in the middle of an American war zone.
People who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Atop the twisted steel and concrete, the war on terror was signaled. There is no further word this day of survivors found in the rubble. Of all the images of 9/11's aftermath, the most indelible for me will always remain the one of countless people roaming the streets of New York. They clutched pictures of their loved ones who had gone to work one bright morning and never came home. They prayed against all odds that someone, anyone, might release them from their nightmare. Margie Meyer had been married for 31 years to her husband, David.
They don't work, you know, it's very frustrating.
Frustration and grief. The chaos ended. The grief never does. And so we remember the victims of 9/11, all the people who died in a war they did not even know had begun. We honor them and all their loved ones who endure the void that can never be filled, but find a way, somehow, each and every day, to carry on. Nearly 3,000 people died in the coordinated 9/11 terror attacks, a toll for loved ones beyond measure, and for the nation, a toll we are still trying to come to terms with.
Beyond Ground Zero, thousands will gather at other memorial sites.
Nearly a dozen members of a Fort Pierce family are in Shanksville, Pennsylvania today to remember their loved ones who died aboard Flight 93. Newschannel 5's Jon Shainman has their story.
My mother, CECE LYLES, was the strongest person I ever knew.
Jerome Smith will never forget the day his stepfather came to get him at school.
As soon as I saw him, I kind of knew already what was going on.
Airplane crash over on Lambertsville Road.
CeCe Lyles was a flight attendant on board Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. She had grown up with a strong connection to family.
She had all of the goods, you know. She was beautiful, but she was tough.
That toughness served her well while she served 6 years as a detective with the Fort Pierce Police Department. But there was tenderness as well from this mom who sometimes worked 2 jobs to support the family. Jerome's brother, Javon Castrillo, is a high school junior. Only 6 when his mother died. His fondest memory is of getting tucked in at night.
She used to sit in my bed until I fell asleep. And some nights when she'd come home from working, she would wake me up just to take me to her bed to sleep.
After Flight 93 was taken over, Lyles called home to tell her family how much they meant to her.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. Please tell my children that I love them very much.
And we definitely knew she loved us.
Today, the Lyles family doesn't have to go very far to see CECE. There's a statue of her along the Indian River here in downtown Fort Pierce.
It's calm. It's just a really great scene, a great place for it to be.
Today, Jerome Smith has a passion for planes and flying. He wants to become a pilot.
Being up in the sky kind of makes me feel like a part of her, you know.
This weekend, Jerome and his family will fly north to this field in rural Pennsylvania to remember the woman still keeping the family together and those who were with her on September 11th.
They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but they were people that are now heroes.
Jon Shainman, WPTV, News Channel 5.
Pieces of steel from the Twin Towers are now the centerpieces for 9/11 memorials across the country, including some in our area. They are a tangible reminder of one of the worst days in our history and signify the strength of Americans during our darkest hour. Trucked in from Ground Zero, arriving by motorcade, a 36-foot-long steel beam, once part of the South Tower of the World Trade Center between the 12th and 15th floors. Today, it's in front of Fire Station 3 on North Lake Boulevard in Palm Beach Gardens. The beam is among more than 1,000 artifacts from the 110-floor towers that serve as constant reminders around our country of what happened 1 decade ago. This is the newest addition to Wellington's Patriot Memorial, a 22-foot column recovered from the World Trade Center. Wellington plans to unveil its 9/11 memorial on Sunday at the new Village Hall complex. In Tequesta, 3 firefighters and 2 police officers had the privilege of bringing 2 6-foot steel beams back from Ground Zero. The pieces arrived in the back of a fire rescue unit and are on display at the Tequesta Public Safety Memorial in honor of the fallen first responders on 9/11. Remembrance combined with prayer surrounds this gift from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey at a Port St. Lucie church. 2 pieces of steel now formed into a cross.
It's a real symbol, this cross, of sacrifice, and what was once a symbol of death becomes a real symbol of love and life, as it did with Jesus.
The cross is currently on display at the foot of the altar at St. Bernadette Catholic Church. Soon, a garden will be created where it will be permanently displayed in memory of all those who lost their lives on 9/11. There are a number of memorials around our area tomorrow marking the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and you can find a complete list on our website, WPTV.com. Just click on the Scene on 5 section on our homepage. This 10th anniversary of 9/11 is an enduringly powerful and painful memory for those who survived the attack.
Next on our special presentation, Remembering 9/11, we bring you the story of a South Floridian who was on the 95th floor of Tower 2 on 9/11 and how she's using this 10th anniversary of the attacks to teach others to overcome their fears.
And tomorrow we begin a full morning of coverage of the 10th anniversary of the attacks with a special edition of Today on 5. John Favoli and Roxanne Stein bring you coverage from throughout South Florida, and Michael will be reporting from New York beginning at 6 a.m. NBC News special coverage of remembrance ceremonies from New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania begin at 8 a.m. And we'll have a complete wrap-up of the day's events on News Channel 5 at 6 with Jon Shainman and Tanya Rogers.
For those in New York City who experienced the September 11th attacks firsthand, returning to ground zero can be extremely difficult, even 10 years later.
A West Palm Beach woman who was working inside the World Trade Center on 9/11 will, for the first time, journey to where the Twin Towers once stood. Newschannel 5's Dan Corcoran has her story.
New York City, September 2001. West Palm Beach's Michelle Rosado snapped these pictures just days before the attacks that changed America forever.
The cubicles were very high. Everything was cherry wood. It was the kind of office that I really always wanted to work in.
High up on the 95th floor of World Trade Center Tower 2, Michelle felt the vibration of the first plane slamming into Tower 1, shattering the glass windows of her office. Her instincts pushed her toward the stairs, but a coworker pulled her into an elevator with dozens of others. Together, they descended.
I said, should I go back upstairs? I questioned my actions at that moment.
But Michelle continued downward.
And as soon as I walked out of the building, that was when I heard the roar of another airplane engine.
Tower 2 had been hit.
I didn't run. I stood there in complete shock for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
Flash forward 10 years, and Michelle is preparing for her first journey back to ground zero. Now an author, a motivational speaker, and an entrepreneur, Michelle helps others face their biggest fears, even though until now she wasn't ready to face her own.
I still was not able to actually walk even past where they were starting to reconstruct the building. I knew in my heart that I just was not ready.
She is ready now. Michelle thumbs through photos of her life before September 11th, still learning, she says, how to live life after. Dan Corcoran, WPTV News Channel 5.
One of the photographs Michelle took on September 7th, 2001, will be used in the 9/11 Memorial Museum, which opens next year where the Twin Towers once stood. She's planning on delivering her photo in person to museum curators later this month.
September 11th tore holes in thousands of families and many more millions of hearts. But the terrorist attacks were also the horrifying linchpin that helped bring one Boca Raton couple together. News Channel 5's Evan Axelbank tells us their story, one they've spent writing literally for years.
Joyce's first husband, Barry, collapsed and died on August 1st, 2001. Michael's first wife, Margaret, died 5 weeks later in the terrorist attacks of September 11th.
Joyce laid down next to Barry, who mentioned he was experiencing pain.
It never occurred to her Barry would die before her. Margaret left later for her bus ride to Lower Manhattan, where she worked for Cantor Fitzgerald as a receptionist on the 103rd floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
All he could do was wander aimlessly throughout Lower Manhattan looking for his wife.
Since 2006, Michael and Joyce Connor have typed 39,218 words, 83 pages, about how they became a couple.
As horrible as the events were of 9/11 and Joyce's husband's death, they do fade a little bit, but you don't want them to fade.
Heart attacks and terrorist attacks.
This tremor was accompanied by a rumble that was unlike anything he had ever heard. After the wind that propelled the dust storm subsided, the air was alive with a mixture of soft and gritty fine particles.
Depression.
The present showed no hope for the future.
It would take a third sad event, a wake, to bring them together. Joyce's friend's mother-in-law died in August of 2002. Also at the wake was Michael, because the woman who died also happened to be his aunt.
I said to him, my husband is gone 48 weeks, and he answered in the number of weeks that Margaret had been dead.
They call the journal Double Nickels for 55, how old they both were when they met.
You know, you go over the event before we wrote about it, and then the words just keep flowing. When you
How long will it go? Well, they're currently writing the part about moving to Boca Raton. And sometimes they go for months without writing anything. Still, they're 50 pages past the moment when they fell in love. As any writer knows, there's always more proofreading to be done.
How about that?
Yeah, that looks better.
Yet as much time as they've spent looking back, or maybe because of it,
reread it, I must have been 100 times.
It's the future that this couple, who are both retired, work on.
And we do realize whatever you have may not be there tomorrow. So I think it's with that attitude that we share our life now.
Evan Axelbank, WPTV, News Channel 5.
Would they ever make it into a book? Only if someone asked them. They say they're just fine with the fact that only 5 people have read it. The couple is spending the 10th anniversary of 9/11 at Ground Zero, where they will mark the death of Mary Margaret Connor. She was 57. Well, many of us remember watching the video of President Bush in a Florida classroom learning about the attacks of 9/11.
Those elementary school children, now grown up, and this 10th anniversary of 9/11 has particular meaning for them as well. Their stories next on our News Channel 5 presentation, Remembering 9/11. A New York City paramedic who now calls Wellington home lives every single day with the impacts from the September 11th attacks. He was caught up in that massive cloud of smoke and debris at Ground Zero. His lungs, his life have never been the same.
Mark Harris rushed in from Staten Island to Lower Manhattan. When the first tower collapsed, he nearly died. But he went right back into the aftermath, and he's reminded about that every day. News Channel 5's Shannon Cake has his story.
For Wellington's Mark Harris, these weren't just images he saw unfolding on TV.
That big black cloud, you could not run it.
The retired FDNY paramedic lived through it, and now he lives with it in his mind, in his lungs, 10 years after the Twin Towers fell, just a few hundred feet from where he was standing that morning.
I had my hand in front of my eyes, and I couldn't see my hand. And it was so thick that I started to fade out.
He remembers curling up on the ground when something very sharp, he doesn't know what it was exactly, nearly sliced his body open.
If this vest wasn't there, that would have ripped into me.
Harris remained at Ground Zero, breathing in the smoke, the soot, the debris from the morning of September 11th through the morning of the 12th.
I wake up some nights, you know, in a cold sweat or crying because I remember the suffocation from the dust.
He can't quite breathe like he used to. Year after year, Harris's lung function continues to diminish. He suffers from reactive airway disease, sinus problems, and too often he finds himself wheezing.
I got buried by whatever was there, and the smoke was incredible.
And it's not just the physical damage, but also the emotional toll that Harris and so many others suffer from a decade later.
It's everything. I never had a problem sleeping before 9/11.
Irreversible symptoms, indelible memories, scars he will carry forever. Shannon Cake, WPTV, News Channel 5.
For years, Harris has seen a number of doctors for a number of reasons. Issues with his lungs, his eyes, even in his mind. He wants Americans to think of 9/11 as more than just a moment in history, but also as an event that still impacts so many lives every day.
Where were you on 9/11? It is a question that will always be asked.
16 Sarasota children are part of the sad history of that day. They were only 7 years old at the time, sitting together in a classroom with President George W. Bush when he learned our nation was under attack. They're grown up now, but their memories of that morning are still vivid.
What do these two letters say?
At only 7 years old, they were the face of second-grade innocence. Just as the news of evil was being whispered into President George W. Bush's ear on the morning of 9/11. Now, 10 years later.
I'm Chantal Guerrero. I'm Natalia Jones Pinkney.
I'm LaDamian Smith.
My name is Mariah Williams, and I remember 9/11 because I was in a classroom with President Bush when it happened.
That classroom, room 301 at Emma E. Booker Elementary in Sarasota, is where we sat down with 4 of the 16 students who were reading to the president that morning.
We were just excited that the president was there.
Now, a piece of history. This was the book of short stories they were reading when Chief of Staff Andrew Card told the president a second plane had just flown into the World Trade Center.
Oh my God. He whispered something to the president. I seen his face like turn red.
I see the face and I think,
Something is wrong.
That image of the president receiving the news that morning is ingrained in our memories, as much as the video of the planes flying into the Twin Towers. For these kids, now seniors in high school, they remember the next 7 minutes that the president stayed in the room as frozen in time.
Everything changed about him, and you can see it all over his face.
May God bless the victims, their families, and America.
President Bush soon exited the room with a quick goodbye, meeting with his staff in the school library. The kids watched on television.
I didn't know what a terrorist was or, anything like that. The World Trade Center, I didn't know what that was.
Celestine Campbell, teaching 2nd grade, remembers the Secret Service quickly trying to get the president out of the building and airborne. She knew he was a man of faith and got close enough to grab his hand.
He was headed out. I stopped him on that end. And I said, Mr. President, may I pray for you? And he stopped and he let me pray with him.
A decade later, time has sent these Sarasota teens in different directions, different schools. But there will always be that morning in history that will be the thread that connects them.
We saw history happen. We saw what you hear about in your history books.
President Bush came under some criticism for staying put after first learning of the attacks. But students who were in the classroom that day say the president set a good example by staying calm.
Many South Florida students were very young, many not yet born in September 2001. And in most history textbooks today, there are just a couple of pages dedicated to the September 11th attacks. As Newschannel 5's Dan Corcoran reports, 9/11 is a hard lesson for students and teachers alike.
Reliving this particular moment in our nation's history can ravage a teacher's heart.
And this stretches down toward ground zero.
Palm Beach Central High School Stu Graydonis had taken photographs of Ground Zero. He showed them to his class on one of the first 9/11 anniversaries. This class included Alicia, who asked to take one of his photos with her.
And I said, which picture do you like? And she said, this one, Mr. Graydonis. And I said, why do you like that picture? And she said, my dad died there that day. My heart was just ripped out.
The history lesson took an unexpected turn.
She said, it's okay, Mr. Graydonis. She's hugging me. She says, I'm over it now. I said, I'm not. And I said, you can have all my pictures. I will never forget Alicia and those people who made the sacrifice.
So how do you tackle a topic as sensitive as 9/11 in the classroom? Well, teachers say hardly any of their lesson comes from textbooks. Instead, it's discussion and the questions these young students have that guide their teaching.
Why did Osama tell them to crash the airplanes into the buildings?
Joseph Caminio teaches 7th grade civics at Watkins Middle School in Palm Beach Gardens.
They have no experience of September 11th. They have to be taught September 11th.
His students were just 2 or 3 years old a decade ago.
Airplanes.
You think about airplanes?
But Mr. Caminio can get choked up.
They understand, wow, look how it is affecting him. I want to understand why.
And then it actually goes into the events that occurred on September 11th.
Ryan Wells was a college student 10 years ago. Now he teaches high schoolers. This week, it's a hard look at September 2001.
When you allow real feelings through the doors of the classrooms, it engages the students much more.
Senior Harrison Fields has been bringing those real feelings to class for a decade.
A tear would always fall down and lead to me crying a lot.
His mother was a medical examiner in New York City 10 years ago.
She had to go through wallets and call families to tell them that their loved ones weren't there.
A difficult subject to talk about, maybe for the same reasons it should be discussed.
I want to make sure that they understand what the world was like on September 10th, 2001, and how the world has changed.
A vivid memory for some, new knowledge for others, perhaps a life lesson for all.
If you can tell the stories to remember, then the kids will understand that and it will become their own.
In Palm Beach County, Dan Corcoran, WPTV News Channel 5.
The Salvation Army is known for helping those who are hurting.
And it was no exception after 9/11. As News Channel 5's Tanya Rogers reports, the man who heads the local Salvation Army says his life will never be the same again.
Dad Cafe and Sally's Safe Haven.
Major Thomas McWilliams and Art Penhale talk about what life was like helping at Ground Zero. The pictures are still vivid in their minds. Major McWilliams was the pit commander who scheduled the 20,000 meals to feed workers at Ground Zero.
We were going 24/7. We had 3 feeding sites triangled at the pit, the decontamination feeding sites, full restaurant type place, tables, chairs, full feeding that we were doing.
Major McWilliams was there for the month of December.
There were firemen and construction guys and police, Port Authority that knew somebody that had been lost or had a family member that would not leave the area. They slept, they lived in that area because they wanted to work every waking moment that they had. I think anyone who was there, I think they would tell you, I was not the same when I came out as when I went in. It just, you couldn't be.
Major McWilliams says it's hard to believe that it has been 10 years since 9/11.
Everyone who went there to help, I would encourage them just to speak about it, talk about it, tell other people about it, because it was a surreal place and it was a surreal environment, and people should share their stories.
Remembering 9/11. Tanya Rogers, WPTV News Channel 5.
And a reminder, we begin a full morning of coverage of the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks with a special edition of Today on 5 tomorrow. John Favoli and Roxanne Stein will bring you coverage from throughout South Florida, and Michael will be reporting live from New York beginning at 6 a.m. NBC News special coverage of remembrance ceremonies from New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania begins at 8 a.m. And we'll have a wrap-up of the day's events on News Channel 5 at 6 with Jon Shainman and Tanya Rogers. Thank you very much for joining us for our News Channel 5 special, Remembering 9/11.
From all of us at News Channel 5, good evening.